when I was a child, I have a number of siblings, but the one who's closest to me, my brother Roy, we were siblings, we would fight a lot. And he was so annoying for a while because he went through this stage of calling himself Roy the Great all the time. Oh my goodness. And I got a little sick of it. And so I decided I was going to get him in trouble. So I took some magic marker down into the basement and wrote on the wall, Roy the Great. And I was so proud of myself because I knew that my mother was going to find it, and who called himself Roy the Great, he would be totally busted. The only problem is that I was, and still am, a terrible speller. So I spelled it Roy the Grate. My mother wisely just asked each of us to spell the word great, and I spelled it incorrectly, and so she simply handed me a bunch of material to clean it up. I imagine that argument on the way to Capernaum was not a whole heck of a lot different. A little bit of sibling rivalry going on, and I love the way that the gospel tells, this particular gospel tells that story with the disciples just sort of sitting there in silence when Jesus says, "What were you talking about?" They kind of know they've been busted. It seems like at first blush this is going to be a cautionary tale against pride. And it got me thinking about pride and what's the opposite of pride? We often think of the opposite as being a kind of a groveling or really taking on a super low status. The word humility may to us connotate that kind of very almost arbitrary taking on of a low status for oneself. And that got me thinking about some Buddhist monk sects that take on begging every day as a way to stay humble. Well, my mother figures in this story too. She loved to travel, and it always bothered her that those Buddhist monks would be begging, because for her, she said, there are so many people who have to beg. It seems a little bothersome that some people take that on as a practice when there are people who really actually need the food. Now, it's a religious practice, so I'm not going to comment on that too much, except for to say that I do get why she was talking about that as being this taking on, in an arbitrary way, something that is not necessarily theirs to take on. So I was doing some reading and ran across Christopher Alt, who said, too many people think of humility as having a modest or low view of one's own importance. It's taken on as being the opposite of pride, a modest or low view. And we sort of create this spectrum when we think about pride and humility, and we think of it as sort of this virtue and vice spectrum, where pride is on the side of vice and humility is on the side of virtue. But maybe that's really not so helpful to us. In his book, Jesus and Virtue Ethics, James Keenan writes, "To be humble is to know one's own power in the universe and to respect one's place in that universe and the place of others, which is to say, to locate oneself properly. That true humility is not taking on a lowly position. It's understanding where we fall in all of God's great creation. Which means that we can have pride. It's not bad to have pride, as long as it's pride in or pride for. We can be proud, for example, of being part of this congregation that has fixed its steeple and serves its community, which is quite different from saying we're the best church in town. One is pride is the bad side of pride that needs to be mended, and the other is a correct location of ourselves. So the way to mend pride is not false humility, but accurate location of ourselves. In high school, I had a friend whose mother used to always say, whatever special thing you are, there will always be somebody who is better at that than you. There will always be somebody who's smarter or faster or more flexible or has a better voice or is prettier or so on and so on and so on. So it's really important for us to just understand that all of us are lovingly made by God, appreciated by God. We are treasured by God. I love the fact that in today's scripture, Jesus has the last move to end the debate about who is first and who is last. And to end it, what Jesus does is find a child and put a child in the midst of them, to normalize this debate by having them view a child and then say, you must welcome one such as this, which is to say, to be hospitable. And to be hospitable is to see another's needs and desires before your own, to accommodate to somebody else's wishes and tastes. So by welcoming others, we get out of our own way. We stop thinking so much about where we fall in the universe and start thinking about how it is that we can be open and gracious to another. So maybe above all, to mend pride is to worry less about ourselves and more about others. To understand that we do have a place in God's world, a particular place, and everyone else does too. So let us mend our pride. Be easy, Jesus seems to say. Celebrities at some point will be common folk, and the poor, disabled, immigrant among us will be honored at some point, and you are just fine. You are loved by God, so you don't need to calculate your status. In God's realm, all is mixed up and fluid in the end, but God knows who we are and where we are and whose we are and where are we going. Where are we going? Well, a child will lead us.